Welcome into episode number 142 of The Voice Behind the Voice. I'm Sean Aronson, the TV and radio broadcaster of the St. Paul Saints, an independent minor league baseball team in the Twin Cities. You've probably heard me complain about the offseason, 1,000 times on this podcast, that it is so tough after grinding through a season, which is why we're all here, or at least most of us, and especially broadcasters. You work in minor league sports because you love the season. You love the excitement of what a season brings. And, of course, last year, making a run to the championship series and that excitement. The 8 months of the offseason, though, can feel like forever. But here we are, middle of January, halfway home. We are halfway through the 8 months. And so you can almost, I'm not saying you can, but almost start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I usually target pitchers and catchers reporting as that time when things start to change just a little bit, where you can start to feel it getting closer, right? And, of course, pitchers and catchers, I think, start in about 3 weeks, a little bit earlier this year, because I believe the Major League Baseball season starts earlier than it has in the past. And so it's almost getting to that point where I'm getting excited. Not quite yet, but getting there. So halfway home to this offseason. The tough thing about here, I spent 4 years in Fort Myers, where the wintertime was the best time of the year down in Florida. You'd play golf in December and January, and it was great. And so you never really went through that seasonal depression. Now, here in Minnesota, it is a real thing, and I think I've talked about that before. I went to the University of Colorado, and in my first year there, I had never really had a winter, right? I spent 18 years in California, and then when April hit, all of a sudden I found my mood changed. Maybe it was March, I don't know what it was, but all of a sudden my mood changed, and I didn't know what it was at the time. You figured, you're happy, it's great, it's almost the end of the school year. But when the weather turned and got nicer, that's when you started to get happier. And I'm a big believer in seasonal depression. Now, the winter in Minnesota this year has been phenomenal. If you compare it to years past, almost no snow. The weather has been in the 30s for the most part. I mean, it really has not been that bad at all. But still, you love the 60s that the springtime will eventually bring, and then the 70s and 80s of the summer. So not that much further to go. So the halfway point, and we'll get there at some point. With that said, let's take you to episode number 142 with Jon Sandler of the UNLV Runnin Rebels. Yep, this one was done at the baseball winter meetings. So we did this a little over a month ago now when I was in Vegas for the winter meetings, and I met Jon at his place of employment. And you think, you went to the Thomas and Mack Center at UNLV. Nope, not quite. It's a guy that has a full-time job and does UNLV basketball. And the interesting thing about Jon is when he first graduated from school, from Stanford, he was a lawyer. Guy was a lawyer. And he's not the first one I've talked to that used to be a lawyer and then decided he didn't want to be a lawyer and got into play-by-play broadcasting. So there is that interesting dynamic. And he talks about working for an independent baseball team in California. And you'll hear how terrible of an experience that was in terms of the conditions. You'll also hear him talk about the fact that he has virtually lost sight in one of his eyes. Interesting story, again, that we get into. So really a fascinating guy, and he works over at Allegiant Air, or the Allegiant Company, which is an airline, and I believe its hub is in Vegas. I would assume it is in Vegas, but about 25 miles outside of the Strip is where I met him. Took a cab, took a taxi out there, and then Ubered it back. So good time. It was a super, super nice guy and has a great sense of humor as well, which you'll hear in this episode. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, you can do so. iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Again, be sure to rate us if you did not do that in making your New Year's resolution. It's not too late to do that. We're only a couple of weeks into the new year. So I know that was everybody's resolution to rate this podcast and help me out, because why wouldn't you do that? You can follow us on social media, Twitter @TheVoiceBTV, Facebook, facebook.com/TheVoiceBTV. And you can always email me, as a gentleman did this past week, to ask for advice on what it's like to get into the business. You can do that, thevoicebtv@gmail.com. All right, let's get to it. Episode number 142 with Jon Sandler of the UNLV Runnin Rebels. JW, roll the open.
First game I ever did was on the road.
Yep.
First home game, they plugged in the hot dog cooker in the third base concession stand and the left field lights went out.